Okay, we start at the beginning with creation, fall, flood, rainbow, Tower of Babel, scattering. Brings us to the city of Ur. And what's that body of water? Persian Gulf. And we're here with Abraham. They travel up which is just below the Tigris River, to Haran, where Terah dies. Abraham is promised 6 things: land, seed, blessing, and promised them literally, eternally, unconditionally. So we have Abraham, Lot. They travel down to Canaan. Okay? Abraham has 4 eyes, 2 in his head, 2 in his house. His sons are Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac has Jacob, Esau. Jacob has 12 sons, 1 daughter, Dinah, in the kitchen. Youngest son, Nick's the youngest. What book are we in? Joseph is sold into slavery to Egypt. What's this body of water? Mediterranean Sea, where he becomes a big wheel. Not in the Mediterranean Sea, in Egypt. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, famine. The rest of the family come down to Egypt. They're here for 400 years, bondage. God raises up, leads them across what book are we in? Exodus, to Mount Sinai, where they get Torah. What book are we in? Good. No, we're not in Leviticus. Leviticus is in Exodus. Remember, Leviticus isn't a historical book. Okay, so historical books, 11 of them. They leave Mount Sinai. They come to Kadesh Barnea. They send out 12 spies. They look around the land. They come back. 2 say yes. 10 say no. Result of disobedience, judgment. Wander in the wilderness 40 years. First generation dies. Moses brings them up to Moab, preaches, dies. What historical book are we in? Good. Don't say Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy, but historical book is Numbers. Okay? Moses preaches, dies. Next leader leads them across and they conquer Jericho. Walls fall down. They also conquer Ai, drive a wedge in the land, conquer the south, conquer the north, divide the land up between the tribes. What book are we in? Joshua. Next period, Judges, chaos, anarchy, downward spiral. Book we're in? Yeah, we said that, didn't we? Last judge and the first prophet anoints the first king. And then the second king is? And Samuel dies. What book are we in? Oh, that was slow. The book of Jesus, yes. 2 Samuel, okay? 1 Samuel, Saul. 2 Samuel, David, though he starts in Saul's book, but still Saul's book. And then next king is Solomon, and his book is 1 Kings. So we got 4 books of the kings, and there's 3 of them. Kingdom splits in 931 BC, all right? 2 tribes in the south, and there are kingdom is called, okay, and 10 in the north called Israel. Northern king, Jeroboam. Southern king, Rehoboam. Okay, we've got the ABCs of the captivity. The Assyrians come and conquer the north in 722 and scatter. The B's, the Babylonians, conquer the south in 586 and deport. They're here for 70 years, and then the sea, Cyrus the Great, the Medo-Persian king, allows them to come back in 3 waves. First wave led back by Zerubbabel. Second wave by Ezra. Thank you. See, you know better than I do. And the third wave by Nehemiah. They rebuild temple, walls. Old Testament Revelation closes. 400 years, silence, birth of Christ. Good. Okay, you're getting it. Now, let's see here. Yes, ma'am. Uh-huh. What book is he in? Which one was he? Which one was he of the first three raves? What are the historical books that deal with the return? Ezra, Nehemiah. So you've got Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah. So Zerubbabel is going to be in Ezra with Ezra. And then Nehemiah is going to be in Nehemiah with Nehemiah. Yeah, so what we have going in the book of Numbers, remember, is you've got first generation, second generation. The first generation starts out well. They then rebel, they sin, they get to the point where God says, okay, you are not going to enter the land. And so there's terminal discipline, terminal judgment. But the second generation is going to enter the land. And so they are being trained in the wilderness. And so what we find in chapters, as the book goes on, is we find a transition from the second to the first generation. Chapters 15 to 19, we find the second generation being instructed in worship, in recollection and recalling how they were going to recall, little tassels on the ends of their garments and all these little things that seem so strange to us. But they all had to do with object lesson, and they had to do with reminders, and we do things still like that today. We tie strings around our fingers, and we write little notes to ourselves, and we see something hanging in the doorway that we need to do when we come home, so that when we come to the doorway we remember the item. I mean, we do all kinds of little things like that, and that's what a lot of this was. And regarding the priesthood, so the second generation is beginning to be instructed. Their parents had been instructed in what they needed to know in order to live in God's presence, and now the second generation is receiving instruction, while the first generation is being judged for failure. And so in chapters 20 to 21, we find Miriam dying. We find Moses and his sin of presumption and over his irritation with the people. You can imagine being irritated in his condition or his situation, can't you? Yeah, worse than babysitting your younger siblings. Far worse. Okay, Aaron dies. We have the account of the fiery serpents. So again, looking at big picture overview as we put these together in the flow of the book, and it's a literary structure that is designed to communicate this transition. We see very clearly that there are now, there's a two-pronged emphasis in the book. The one is to prepare the second generation for entering the land, while the first generation is being judged with death. And that in itself is a part of the training of the second generation. And this is going to be used throughout the Old Testament. Look at what happened to your fathers who fell in the wilderness through disobedience. Do not do this. And so this becomes a warning tool for the rest of the Old Testament. But in all of this, the Lord remains faithful. Yahweh remains faithful. In the defeat of the Canaanites and safety in their movement, protection from paganism. And so again, as we saw at the beginning of the book, God's faithfulness is the constant through the whole thing. He had created the people. He had entered into a covenant with them at Mount Sinai by which they became His priest nation. He had guaranteed His presence with them, given them the tabernacle, the sacrificial system, in order for that to work so that His holiness could be properly observed and satisfied through sacrifice, and He would accept that in terms of cleansing for their sin. And so we see that He's the constant in all of this. And He is the one who has a world purpose. He has created the nation of Israel to be at the center of that. And He is going to move toward that end. But He is also going to deal with their disobedience in the meantime. And we will see more of that when we get to Deuteronomy. So that carries us along. Yeah, okay. To the Balaam oracles. The last thing there, protection from paganism, is these Balaam oracles are there. As you read through these, what were your thoughts? And by the way, how many of you, this is the first time you've ever read through the Balaam oracles? Okay, all right. I don't know, you may have heard it preached on. You know, it's pretty good preaching stuff where you got a talking donkey. But I dare say none of you have probably studied the Balaam oracles. What were some of the thoughts you had as you read? Yeah, obviously it's God speaking through the donkey. And that's part of the whole story, isn't it? Why is this donkey in here? Doesn't that kind of cheapen the scriptures? Doesn't that make it, that's what you find in fairy tales. That's stories that children make up. God resorts to using a talking donkey? Come on now. Is that reasonable? Well, there it is. There it is. We have this talking donkey. And the Balaam oracles are very interesting. And you have this debate on this guy. I mean, is he a prophet who's gone bad? Or is he just a false diviner of, for whoever will pay, and he goes and conjures up whatever god he can get to talk to him? And of course, the gods that would talk to him would be demons behind the gods of the peoples who would worship. And here he just is approaching God as as another one of those, and all of a sudden is surprised that here's a real God talking to him. Who is this guy? Well, I don't know. I've moved back and forth in my thinking on this over the years, and I'm still not sure where I am with regard to it. But he does come into encounter with the real God. And the important thing to remember here is that the donkey is the key to what is going on in this passage. How is the donkey the key? How's the donkey the key? What's a prophet? Now, we haven't gotten to the prophets yet, so you're asking you to draw on what we're coming to. What's a prophet? A mouthpiece of God. That's well put. And that's exactly what the prophet is. A prophet would come and say, "Thus says the Lord." Where did he get his message? Directly from God. He didn't get it in his study thinking, let's see, what should I say to the people today? Let's see, Deuteronomy. Let's see, what can I say out of Deuteronomy? No, he was going and he's saying, here is God's verbatim communication to you. That's what a prophet is. And that's what, Balaam ends up doing. And he ends up doing it in spite of himself. Do you see the analogy with the donkey? Do donkeys make up their minds to talk and to communicate? They can't. They can't. And so from that standpoint, Balaam really could not communicate anything to those people unless God just put the words in his mouth. And the whole point that he was hired to do one thing and he ends up doing something different is to show that just like the donkey, he is under the complete control of God to God's ends, regardless of what his immediate intention was or what his ultimate desire was. His chief desire was to get paid, wasn't it? What was God's desire? To bless Israel. And what ends up happening? Probably both. He probably gets paid, but he makes Balak angry. But Israel gets blessed. And so, in that, God is speaking through Balaam just as directly and in complete control as he does through the donkey. And I think that's what the donkey is there to show and to illustrate. And that God speaking through the donkey serves a good purpose in Balaam's life. He's blessed thereby, isn't he? And what does Balaam do for Israel? Blesses them, because God undertakes to do this. So regardless of what this man's ultimate spiritual state is, he's used in the New Testament as one who was simply out for gain, and he is attached later to the sin where Israel falls into false worship. But we do see this very interesting thing. And just to summarize the oracles, there's the donkey. Why did you hit me? The first oracle basically establishes the fact that that God is that Israel is mighty in numbers. And so, Oracle 1, chapter 22:41 to 23:12, basically he just praises God in terms of the number of Israel, and he just says, look at them. Is there anything like this? The second oracle, basically, he confesses the fact that God is Israel's power and blessing. God is Israel's power and blessing. In 23:13, starting in 18, rise up, Balak, and hear, listen to me. God is not a man that he should lie. And verse 20, I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it. And so God is Israel's power. He is their blessing. God brings them out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. And so he ends up praising the God of Israel in the second oracle. Oracle 3, Israel is lovely and will prevail over the nations. Israel is lovely and will prevail over the nations, one of which is Balak's nation. Now that is not what Balak wanted. Balak was worried about him. Balak saw this people, they're too numerous, they're camping next to me, I want you to curse them. And did you notice in the reading he says, because I know that whom you bless is blessed and whom you curse is cursed. He's seen this guy in operation. He was a pagan diviner. That's what it says he is in the text. And that's why they went to hire him, because he had some ability to bring down good and ill on people. And so however that happened and wherever it came from, that's his reputation. And yet here we find him doing just the opposite. And the final, a star scepter, will lead Israel in victory. And this, as somebody has mentioned, is one of the most interesting of the prophecies. The utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the utterance of the man whose eyes are open. Now he starts to say that here. And it just makes you wonder if something new has dawned upon him in regard to the God of Israel. This isn't just another one of the deities of the nations that I can cajole and manipulate. This is the God of heaven. And he calls him God. He calls him the Most High, the Almighty. And in verse 17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. And as you would compare this back to Genesis 49:10, where we have probably the first prophetic statement of a ruler who will come out of the tribe of Judah, it's a very, very interesting parallel. And so in the mouth of this pagan diviner, we probably even have a messianic prophecy. And here's the text. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. And that's almost like I see someone in this realm as ruler, but he's somewhere down in the distance. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. And Edom shall be a possession, Seir also his enemy shall be a possession, while Israel does valiantly. Out of Jacob one shall have dominion, and destroy the remains of the city. So he's looking at a ruler who will come and rule over all the nations that they are familiar with. Now, we are going to see this developed explicitly in Deuteronomy chapter 28 as Moses talks to the nation about their ultimate future. Then he looked on Amalek, and he took up his oracle and said, Amalek was first among the nations, but should be last until he perishes. And he looked on the Kenites and took up the oracle. Firm is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. Nevertheless, Cain shall be burned. How long until Asher carries you away captive? Then he took up the oracle and said, Alas, who shall live when God does this? But ships shall come from the coasts of Cyprus, and they shall afflict Asher and afflict Eber. And so shall Amalek until he perishes. And so Balaam arose and departed and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. He really, in this oracle, has a compressed summary, an outline, an agenda of what the rest of the prophets will do. And that is they will look at one who will come, one who will destroy the nations, one who will put Israel at the top, will bring them into ascendancy, one who will be the key to working out God's purpose among the nations. And so we do see here in his ministry or in his prophecy, really a foregleaning of what the prophets will come and say. And so he is clearly God's mouthpiece here. Apart from whether he really believed in the Lord, we don't have to answer, because donkeys don't believe in the Lord, but can still talk on his behalf. And so it really matters not, in this case, what this man's spiritual condition was. That was not the key to the blessing of Israel. It was God and his sovereign purpose. And so we do see, in this case, just God overriding what were the inclinations and intentions of the author in the first place, or of this pagan diviner in the first place. Of course, he does the same thing with one of his true prophets, Jonah, as we will see. Jonah doesn't want to say what God wants him to say either, but he does. So this is part of the way God works with his prophets. Now, that brings us to just a summary of what we find at the end here. The second generation is prepared to enter the land in chapters 26 to 36. We find a second census, and that census serves to show that the replacement of the first generation is complete. Remember, one of the excuses that the spies and the people who listened to them gave for not going into the land was, hey, we're thinking about our wives and our children. And these people in there are so fierce that they're going to kill our wives and our children. What's God say? You're the ones that are going to die out here, and your children are going to go into the land. And so that's what we find. The second census that's taken shows that the first generation has been completely replaced number-wise, and so there is no loss of life. And the point being that God was with them, and they didn't have to fear that. We find the final instructions in chapter 28 to 36, worship and service in the land. And now the land is being emphasized because this generation is going to be taken in. Vows of dedication. There's a traditional enemy that's dealt with. The instruction to secure unity and to encourage them in two ways: by reminding them of Israel's failure, yet Yahweh's faithfulness, and instruction for conquest. And so, again, I'm there with you. Your parents had every reason to know that. They didn't listen to me. They paid the price of their disobedience, and I'm still here. And so we find that the second generation has replaced the first and has been instructed and prepared additionally in order to be ready to go into the land. And this will prepare them to hear and respond to Moses. So that's an overview of Numbers. Again, we see God in complete control and yet working with the people in regard to their response and lack of response. Take that chart, and I want to just kind of summarize the Pentateuch is is what we want to do here. Again, we're trying to give an overview, and the emphasis in Deuteronomy is going to be the need for Israel to respond to God with their hearts, that they need a change of heart. And so there's a lot of love talk in Deuteronomy between God and His people on both ways, and we'll look at that. But I want to just look at the message of the Pentateuch so far as we've been building it. In Genesis, we find the mandate of blessing as God makes a covenant with Abraham and promises that He will give him a seed, that child will become a nation, and that nation will be the key to the blessing of all the families of the earth. And so we see the mandate of blessing, which is universal, and the covenant that will eventually lead toward a nationhood, first laid out in Genesis. Remember, Genesis is the foundational document that was produced for the generation that left Egypt. That left Egypt, for Israel as they became a nation. And so it tells them who they were, where they came from, and all. It tells them about the God that was leading them into the desert. And we talked about how had they always remembered that and kept that in mind, it would have been sufficient for them to endure whatever it was they were enduring, and to get in line with the program, to have an excitement about what God wanted to do with them. In Exodus, then, we find this nation being born. Exodus 19:5 and 6, "You shall be a special treasure to me above all people, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." And so this is the birth of the nation. The people, as God's Son, have existed and been growing in Egypt, but now they are constituted as a nation. And so in Exodus we find the formal covenant being made, whereby God becomes their king and they become His people, and He sets forth how they are to serve Him. And so the servant relationship is set forth. And so Exodus then is the founding of the nation and the ordering of it, so that they would be this unique nation through which then He can work out the purpose that He promised to Abraham to bless all the families of the earth. Leviticus then, we found, was the nation being instructed in holy living. "Be holy, for I am holy." That is the repeated phrase, the theme of Leviticus. And that was for two purposes. It's so they could live in God's presence. They could have fellowship with Him as a people. And so that they might become a distinct people and therefore have a testimony to the rest of the world that indeed this God was the God of the heavens and the earth. He is the God who alone is to be worshipped. He is the God who is the true blessor. And so we find Leviticus communicating the instruction in terms of how they are to be a holy people, how are they to be that unique, set-apart nation that God had constituted them to be. And so while we find all these strange rules about sacrifice and clean and unclean and all of these things, as we commented when we went to Leviticus, it's just to show them the nature of their relationship with God. That they cannot, by themselves on their own in their moral condition, live in His presence. But He provides that for them through sacrifice. And in observing what He observes, they will become a people with a distinct testimony. They will be unlike any other people on the face of the earth. In Numbers, finally, we see the nation's rebellion, and it's punished. But God's faithfulness is shown. So while the first generation certainly did not deserve to enter the land and is refused entrance into the land, God renews their numbers in the birth of all those in the wilderness. And so the second generation is prepared to enter the land. And we see God's faithfulness. Now as we come to Deuteronomy, we will find the covenant renewed with the second generation, and the relationship even heightened and given more, told more and motivated. And so we just find a continuation of this flow of thought that was begun in Genesis. So, that's a way to, just think through these 5 books and how these 5 books are put together. They're really one work. And in fact, some would say instead of a Pentateuch, we have a Hexateuch that includes Joshua, because that's really the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham to give his descendants a land. But it is one work, and you can very clearly trace structurally in some regard, but certainly thematically, what is going on.